Hello, everybody. This is Kenneth Amon with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here with a special guest, Nathaniel Janine, to talk to you about the current reality of Black students in MPS. We're continuing this conversation because it's just so important. And I'm excited to have you here, Nate. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. And so, we I think a lot of us know Nathaniel as a former student rep. He's a senior at Washburn now, but would love for you to just share a little bit more about who you are, your experience as both a student in Minneapolis Public Schools and as a student rep. What stood out? What takeaways do you have? Would just love to learn a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name's Nathaniel. Hi, everyone. I'm a current senior at Washburn, and of course, I was a student representative for the 2020 academic school year. I will admit I had the privilege of being student rep during a very consequential and odd year, to say the least. But before I was student rep, I was just a student. I've been in MPS for 13 years now. I started off at Hill Elementary School, made my way through Field, and now I'm towards the end of my time at Washburn. I've had a roller coaster of experiences and emotions during my time at MPS. If it's being the first student rep from Washburn, or being the only Black student in my IB diploma cohort, or to only having two Black teachers throughout my entire tenure here at MPS.
Yeah, that's a lot. And I think is really indicative of, just how awesome of a person and a student you are, and also speaks to some of the real challenges and disparities we see in Minneapolis public schools, and especially what Black students are experiencing across the system. And so I'm glad to have your wisdom and experience to be with us to share, and to really for all of us to soak up. And so I did want to go back to the video that we did last week to talk a little bit about some of the data that, you know, ex- tells a story around what the experience of Black students are in Minneapolis public schools as a whole. And I was curious to hear what stood out to you. What data points really stood out to you? I heard you talk a little bit about the fact that you only had two Black teachers, and we definitely shared numbers around the amount of Black teachers in Minneapolis public schools. Talked about advanced course taking and just different things like that. So what stood out to you?
I think how we unfortunately, put students on tracks from a very young age with the use of high stakes standardized testing. Of course, that is something that is mandated at the state level. But I remember reflecting back to, I think it was fourth grade, where I wasn't proficient in reading. So they used to take me out of the classroom, and I would have to get extra reading help, and I'd literally be like pulled out of the setting away from my peers, and that takes a toll on you. And while I know that the extra support is well intentioned, and they want to make sure that you're prepared for the next level, or next um, you know um, class that you're going to be taking, it did take a toll on me. And the one thing that you can't measure with the data points and number is a student's ability to believe in themselves and their ability to do well in school. And that is, you know, that comes from a wide range of things, from having a reflective classroom, or reflective teaching staff, and even having a reflective curriculum.
Yeah, it's you're so right, and I think the conversation around testing gets so muddy because we're told like students are more than their test score, and then at the same time everyone's reducing students to their test score, and not looking at, like you said, the ability for a student to believe in their own in themselves, and to see themselves, and all this different things. And while I personally believe testing is so important for us to be able to, it's a diagnostic, it allows us to understand where students are as a system, where students are at as an individual, and what building blocks we need to help, and what supports and interventions are necessary. I think also we need to acknowledge that there's a whole host of things around them that are going on, um, and like we can value both, right? We can value the test and the score, and we can value everything in the student's life and in the school that supports them, and trying to figure out how does a school support that child that believes in themselves and or that does believe in themselves and has different challenges when it comes to reading or math, or comes from a home whose first language is in English, right? Like I think there are so many different things that obviously impact students, and I think what testing provides a insight into is, are we meeting the needs of our students? And so I think a lot of times we have a and or conversation. I think it's always important to have like a both and conversation. So uh, yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say like there are long-term repercussions to that because I've told myself since I was like a fourth grader that like you're bad at reading. So
Mm,
like I just kind of always told myself that. And like that carries on throughout high school. And I tell myself, oh, you're a bad reader. Don't challenge yourself in a certain subject or don't take the certain course. Or even when like you look into college and like what you want to go to college, where you want to go to college or what you want to do in college is you might purposely tell yourself something that may not be true because you think it's true because it's reflected on a test score, and I think that can do a lot more harm than good.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I remember my own experience as a student, and I was always a pretty good student, but I also, so both of my parents are immigrants, and I also struggled with like writing specifically in English. Um, and so I, when I went into high school, my freshman year, I remember I intentionally chose to go into all like honors classes or whatever, and math and science and whatever else other opportunities there were, I can't even remember. But I intentionally chose not to do English because same reason, like while I was never told that I was specifically bad at English, I knew that was the one that I struggled with the most. And but when I went into my freshman year English class, but at the end of the year, my teacher was telling me like, no, you need to go into honors English. And I think that's the part that's hard, right? Is that again, the test is just a test; it's a score. What we do with that information and how we utilize that information is a whole other conversation. And for someone to still recognize, even though that's the course that I struggled in the most, for someone to recognize the fact that I was capable and I could do it, even if I didn't necessarily believe in myself in that. Like, and I think that's the part where I think we've started to really have an unproductive conversation around testing in the district and in the country. So, but I wanted to segue into what we talked a little bit about what the data represents, and there was a lot of like negative and bad results for Black students in our academic outcomes when it came to the ACT, MCAs, all of that. I did want to hear from you what what wasn't captured in that data that Black students are experiencing every single day in Minneapolis public schools, both when we were in person and now when we're doing distance learning.
Yeah, I think this kind of ties back into what makes a successful, high school experience. What makes me, come out of high school, not only just like, um, you know, I don't want to say smarter, but more book smart, but well prepared for what comes after high school. And if that's feeling comfortable, connecting with a teacher, a problem that I had in my high school experiences I never had the ability to, well, not I never, I had trouble sometimes making that connection with a teacher. I remember it was ninth grade. I was in chemistry. No, I was in physical science. And I was talking to my teacher saying, would you recommend me for this class? And she literally said, like, no, Nathaniel, I don't think you can do it. And I was kind of like, that didn't make sense because I kid you not, all three quarters, and this was during fourth quarter, all three quarters I got an A in class. But for some reason, she still wouldn't recommend me for the higher level class, which was kind of, frustrating. And in the end, I did end up getting into the class. I got always in that class too. But it was a teacher not willing enough to believe in my ability as a student. Another thing is our, opportunities outside of the classroom, and the representation and student voice or certain extracurriculars or leadership and community involvement, um, the proportion of white students in those um, activities, especially at Washburn, it's a disproportionate amount, and that does really, play into how hard it is to kind of find community and find a group of students that you're comfortable to work with on a wide variety of issues in and outside of school.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. Just that insight. And I so how does that translate, amongst like either your group of friends or what you're able to see as a student rep? Like is are you seeing that it is just your experience, or are you seeing trends, and how to, what are other students saying? I know you said you're part of Citywide, which is citywide student government for Minneapolis Public Schools. Um, yeah, how is that translating to other students in other schools across the district?
Yeah, I think we have that conversation often in citywide, where at times when we're doing data collecting or we're trying to get involvement, in student voice, we will unfortunately have a disproportionate amount of white students participating in feedback sessions or information sessions or focus groups, etc. The most disappointing part is we get a very high number of students from a number of schools. There's two schools specifically, I'm not going to name them, which does kind of make it a lot harder to get student voice from across the district. And I can kind of give you a skewed reality. Specifically at Washburn, at my school, we do have a group called Students of Color in Advanced Academics. It's like a
Mm,
mentoring program, and that is also one of those things that have been hit hard by distance learning. But that was a space for students of color to kind of come together and get that necessary support because there was a lot of feedback and complaints about students of color not feeling supported in certain classes and with certain subjects.
that's really interesting. What you said, it was like sort of like a mentoring program. What is the mentoring around? Is it mentoring around like supporting them and like um, the academic side? Is it supporting them morally, like getting them, helping them, get through and believe it? Is it helping them navigate like how do I convince my teacher that I am actually qualified to get into the next class? What does that look like? What is that really around?
Yeah. So there is an academic piece to it, where you can always go to your mentors for academic support. But another thing that I kind of learned is high school is kind of a game. I don't know if I want to say it's a game, and it's basically a game where you got to do certain things to um, be able to be successful. And there are a lot of nuanced, niche things that seniors know and freshmen don't know. And kind of the thing with me was I was the first in my family born in the United States. I'm kind of the first to go through the whole K-12 education paradigm. So I kind of had to figure those things out, as I went. And the
Mm,
whole point of the mentoring program is to basically make sure that, students have the tools necessary beginning freshman year to succeed by the time they graduate.
yeah, that's really great. I mean, that's really powerful, and I think a great example of strong student organizing. Do you know if there are programs like that outside of Washburn and other high schools across the district?
From what I understand, it was a program that was supposed to be expanded to, I can't remember the exact schools. It was like in the appendix, one of the
Okay.
slideshows.
Yeah.
But I think it's a program that's supposed to be expanded to at least four other high schools. But once again, with distance learning, I don't know how that's played out.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the data being skewed towards two high schools, and I want to say you insinuated that it it was skewed towards whiter respondents. And
Yeah.
so, what impact does that have as y'all are doing your work, and you're trying to share? Because I know Citywide shares a lot of their recommendations with district leadership and the board and different things like that. So, what impact does that have as you all are trying to, you know, change stuff or advocate for stuff?
Yeah, I think in the end, different schools have, different needs, and um, every student at every school has a different perspective. My, you know, 4 years at Washburn look very different from, someone's 4 years at Edison. And when you do have a skewed perspective like that, I can't think of a certain problem off the top of my head. Let's say distance learning. So be it. Washburn's distance learning policies are a lot different than Edison's distance learning policies.
Hmm.
And my experience at Washburn is definitely not going to be the same as a student's experience at South or Edison. I literally have a friend at South, and we sometimes talk about some of the requirements that we have in school, between the two schools, and it's very different. So you may get a false sense of reality, or you can get false hope if you have a narrow perspective when looking into certain, problems from a student's perspective.
Yeah. Um, so do you, again, relying on your experience as both a student and student rep, and you look at the data tells a really terrible story that I think we're all familiar with, but we cannot be complacent about. What do you see as the barriers that are causing, these huge disparities? And when I was talking to Heather about this, it's not even just what are causing the disparities, but if you just isolate the individual data points of how Black students are doing across the district in a number of areas, right? Whether it's, again, ACT, MCAs, advanced course taking, suspensions, like all of that spells crisis without comparisons to other groups, right? And so, um, what do you see, again, as the barrier in Minneapolis public schools as to like why this happens? I know it's a deep question, and I didn't actually tell you that I was going to ask that. So,
Yeah. Um, Unfortunately, there is no simple answer, and um, I don't know if I've ever said this before, um, but there is no answer that I could put together in 1 minute or in 30 minutes that would do that question its due diligence. In the end, I think it's um, probably 30 to 60 years of, you know, I don't know how to say this, false perceptions of success and progress that have kind of been um, made into an illusion of, we're doing something when in the end, the biggest problem is that we're not listening to the right communities and we're
mhm,
not valuing their perspectives. And we've done that for so long that it's kind of almost become like numb to our ears. And that numbness is probably why we're not making the strides we need to make.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel that, right? Like I think that I don't. I think we're so used to all of the data that we see, and we see it year over year, and we just kind of roll our eyes at it, or we're just like, yep, that's what Minneapolis Public Schools produces, as opposed to thinking about like, how do we as a city, a progressive city that has all this money and all this wealth, um, allow these outcomes to take place every single day? And I think I've told Heather this many times, right? Like, I think a lot of our city thinks like, yep, we voted in Ilhan, we're good on our progressive ticket. And we're not willing to take a look at how we're treating our Black, Brown, Indigenous communities within the city, and especially our Black, Brown, and Indigenous students, because we can maybe start to talk about you know some of the other things, but when it comes to education, everyone's just like, ooh,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the problem is we have certain groups and certain people who will say, yes, I love change, but that change can't affect me because then it's bad.
mm, mm,
It's
yes,
not what you're willing to vote for, what you're willing to say, it's what you're willing to sacrifice. And in the end, there have not been a lot of sacrifices made.
yep, yeah, that's powerful. So I wanted to wrap and just talking a little bit about student voice, how it's so critically important. Um, as many know, my background is in student organizing and working with students, and so that's how I grew a good relationship with Nate. So excited about our relationship continuing. But I wanted to hear just like your reflections on like how student voice is respected and honored in Minneapolis public schools. What are your thoughts and takeaways on that, and how has that stayed consistent through distance learning? How's distance learning impacted that? Yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think kind of looking back to my tenure in 2020, um, I would say fortunately, it was fortunate that I got a year that was not normal, and I think I was put in a unique situation where um, the whole position of student rep was kind of, I don't want to say relooked at, but um, I tried my best to kind of take a different spin on things, and I'm proud of some of the um, things that we established, if it was student engagement with the CDD, or if it was, finding ways to bring students together to look into, safety and security measures, or if it was simply, graduation requirements. And I think that foundation has kind of served as a really good launch pad for Mary, who was our new student rep, who hopefully, have you guys met yet? You guys
We
connected?
haven't met individually because COVID, but
But hopefully you guys can get to meet. And I think it is,
it's all right. Um, we're just waiting to see if someone's going to walk behind Nate. But you're saying how, um, as students, you've been as a student rep, you're able to establish a lot, and so, um, and hopefully that work will continue with Mary.
yeah, yeah. I'm sorry about that. I do. Nathaniel does still live with family. I'm not on my own yet. But yeah, hopefully Mary will be able to use that foundation and really build off of it. The unfortunate thing is distance learning has kind of put everything on halt, because I'll admit there are some very urgent, pressing needs right now, and I hope Mary, she's doing well. I try my best to connect with her as often as possible, but I do think that once we start getting in person again, and the that distance learning kind of becomes more of a thing of the past, that foundation that we built will be able to be expanded upon, and Mary will have um, all the support that she needs to make sure that she can, you know, do whatever she wants or whatever she hopes to do during her tenure student rep.
Yeah. My last question for you is, what are you hoping student voice looks like in the district in 5 years? How does it need to transform in order to better reflect the needs and desires of students?
Yeah. Um, there's really only one thing, and that's getting the student rep a vote. Um, I think that's the big thing.
Yeah.
Once you do that, everything else is just kind of everything else is will move along and kind of just become a new normal. We I talked with Gabe. He was our student rep back in 2017 and 2018, and he talked about his experiences. And basically, every student rep that I've talked to before me, we all kind of agree that the student rep needs a vote. Oh, there they go. That the student rep needs a vote, and I think once that's done, it paves the way for a new paradigm for student engagement.
Mm, yeah. All right. MPS board members, you heard it. Give those students a vote on that board. Nate, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck finishing out your senior year at Washburn. And I've heard that you have some exciting plans post high school. So congratulations on that. I won't share that for you. But I'm excited to hear more about your journey after MPS. And thank you for everything you've contributed to MPS. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I may not be student rep anymore, but I'm always a resource. I'm always happy to talk with anyone. Always willing to make my voice heard. I'm always willing to do my best to advocate for Minneapolis students.
Awesome. Thanks, Nate. Appreciate it. Have a good day, everybody.